For 17 years, the sprawling estate of Blackwood Manor stood as a monument to flawless high society, its towering iron gates shielding a family whose reputation was immaculate. The Winters family breathed an air of effortless perfection, their wealth vast, their smiles pristine, and their public lives entirely beyond reproach. But perfection is a fragile glass ornament, easily shattered if struck at the exact right angle. Behind the polished mahogany doors and the glittering crystal chandeliers lay a truth so corrosive it could turn their entire empire to ash in seconds. The world believed the Winters' legacy was built on brilliant investments and ancient prestige, completely blind to the rot festering beneath the floorboards. But the world didn't live in the shadows of the grand hallways. The world didn't hear the muffled, panicked arguments echoing from the master study in the dead of night. Elena, the quiet daughter of the family's long-serving live-in maid, heard everything. For her entire life, she had been invisible, moving through the colossal rooms like a ghost, polishing the silver and blending into the wallpaper. But being invisible meant she saw what no one else was ever meant to see, and she knew the terrifying, buried truth that could instantly destroy them all. Elena's mother, Maria, had worked for the Winters family since before Elena was born. To Maria, loyalty was a sacred duty, a shield against the harsh realities of the outside world. She taught Elena early on to keep her eyes down, her mouth shut, and her presence unnoticed. "People like them don't see people like us, Elena," Maria would often whisper in their cramped, dimly lit basement quarters. "And that is our greatest safety. Let them live in their light, and we will stay comfortably in our shade." For a long time, Elena followed that rule implicitly. She watched the Winters' only son, Julian, grow up surrounded by unparalleled privilege, getting everything he ever desired with a simple snap of his fingers. He was groomed to inherit the massive family fortune, treated by the community as a young prince. Elena, meanwhile, spent her afternoons dusting the massive library, folding heavy linen sheets, and scrubbing the marble entryways that Julian walked across without a second thought. But as the years crept by, the dynamic within the grand house began to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. It started with the arrival of a heavy, ornate iron lock placed on the door of Mr. Winters' private basement vault, a room that had previously required only a standard key. Then came the sudden, unexplained departure of the family's longtime accountant, a man who had been a staple at Blackwood Manor for over 2 decades. He vanished overnight, his name never to be spoken again by the family. Elena noticed the lingering tension that hung in the air like a thick fog after his disappearance. She watched Mrs. Winters' hands tremble slightly whenever she poured her morning tea, a stark contrast to her usual rigid, icy composure. The turning point occurred on a stormy autumn evening when the rain beat violently against the tall, arched windows of the manor. Elena was tasked with delivering a fresh pot of coffee to Mr. Winters' study late at night. As she approached the heavy oak doors, she heard voices raised in a fierce, terrified panic, a sound completely foreign to the strictly controlled household. Mr. Winters was pacing the floor, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the wood, while his wife sat rigid on the leather sofa, her face pale. "If the audit goes deeper into the 2008 records, they will find the discrepancies," Mrs. Winters hissed, her voice sharp with desperation. "They won't just look at the missing funds, Arthur. They will look at her name. They will look at her name. They will find out what happened to the girl." Mr. Winters slammed his fist onto the desk, causing the silver inkwell to rattle. "Be quiet. The staff might hear you. That secret has been buried for nearly 2 decades, and it will stay buried. I took care of it then, and I will take care of it now. No one knows. No one will ever know." Outside the door, Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat, the silver tray balanced precariously in her hands. The words echoed in her mind, heavy and terrifying. The girl. The missing funds. Buried for 2 decades. She realized in that sudden, breathless moment that the pristine reputation of the Winters family was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie designed to hide a dark, potentially criminal history. Instead of knocking, Elena quietly stepped back into the shadows of the long hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She returned to the kitchen, her mind racing with questions she knew she shouldn't ask. Over the next several weeks, she began to pay closer attention to the small details she had previously ignored. She noticed the way Mr. Winters obsessively checked the security cameras, the way Julian seemed increasingly anxious whenever the doorbell rang, and the sudden influx of shredded documents filling the trash bins outside the study. Elena knew she was playing a dangerous game. In a house where the walls had ears, harboring a secret of this magnitude was akin to carrying a live grenade. Yet, the temptation to uncover the full truth was overwhelming. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore, she was the silent observer holding the thread that could unravel the entire Winters dynasty. Every morning after that fateful night, the air inside Blackwood Manor felt heavier, suffocatingly tense, as if the grand estate itself was holding its breath before a catastrophic collapse. Elena went about her daily routines with an intense, calculated focus, her ears straining to catch every whispered conversation, her eyes tracking every nervous glance shared between the family members. She quickly realized that knowing a fragment of the truth wasn't a position of power, it was a death sentence waiting to be executed if she made a single misstep. The Winters family operated like a well-oiled machine designed to eliminate threats, and she was well aware that an invisible maid's daughter would be exceptionally easy to erase. Yet, the sheer weight of what she had overheard acted like a magnet, constantly pulling her closer to the flame, forcing her to dig deeper into the family's darkest corners despite the immense risk. The first major shift occurred during a formal dinner party hosted for the city's highest-ranking political elites, an event where the Winters family intended to display their absolute dominance and unshakable stability. Elena was assigned to assist the catering staff, moving gracefully between wealthy guests with trays of expensive champagne, acting as the perfect, unseen servant. As she approached the head table where Mr. Arthur Winters was holding court with a prominent federal judge, a sudden, jarring sound cut through the ambient classical music. A guest at the far end of the room had accidentally dropped a crystal glass, sending a sharp, echoing shatter across the marble floor. While the rest of the guests barely blinked, Arthur Winters reacted with an immediate, violent start, his hand instinctively snapping toward his inner jacket pocket as if reaching for a weapon, his eyes darting frantically toward the main entrance. For a fleeting 2 seconds, the mask of the calm, powerful billionaire completely slipped, revealing a man who was profoundly terrified of being hunted. Elena caught the exact moment his composure broke, her breath catching as she realized he wasn't just worried about an audit. He was actively waiting for someone, or something, to come through those doors and tear his life apart. The tension escalated dramatically the following afternoon when Elena was tasked with cleaning the expansive master suite while the family was out. As she dusted the perimeter of the heavy mahogany armoire, her foot struck a loose floorboard near the back wall, producing a hollow, distinct click. Her heart pounded furiously as she knelt down, carefully prying up the polished wood to reveal a small, dusty leather ledger hidden in the dark recess. Opening it, she didn't find rows of numbers or bank accounts. Instead, she found page after page of handwritten dates, names of local police officials, and massive cash amounts listed next to the word "silenced." Right as her fingers touched the most recent entry, the heavy brass door handle of the master suite began to turn with a slow, agonizing creak. Panic seized her entire body as she violently forced the floorboard back into place, grabbed her dust cloth, and spun around just as Julian Winters stepped into the room. His eyes narrowed instantly, scanning her tense posture and the slight tremor in her hands with a piercing, suspicious intensity. "What are you doing in here, Elena?" Julian asked, his voice deceptively smooth but dripping with an underlying threat. "I thought my mother told the staff that this room was off-limits today." Elena swallowed hard, forcing her gaze downward to play the role of the submissive, terrified maid. "I am deeply sorry, Mr. Julian. I was just finishing the dusting. I'll leave immediately." Julian didn't move from the doorway, blocking her exit as he took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his presence suffocating. "You spend a lot of time in the shadows, don't you? Always walking so quietly. My father says a quiet house is a safe house, but I think people who are too quiet are usually hiding something. Tell me, Elena, what exactly do you see when you're looking down all the time?" The implication was crystal clear. They were beginning to notice her presence, and the protective shield of being invisible was rapidly disintegrating into a trap. That night, the danger transformed from a psychological threat into a physical reality. Elena woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of muffled, heavy footsteps directly above their basement quarters, moving toward the private vault room. Leaving her mother sleeping soundly, Elena crept up the narrow stone stairs, her bare feet making no sound against the cold concrete. As she peeked through the crack of the basement door, she saw Arthur Winters standing in front of the open vault, illuminated by a single, harsh overhead bulb. He was holding a faded, blood-stained silver bracelet, staring at it with an expression of profound, agonizing guilt. But before Elena could process what the object meant, she felt a sudden, freezing breath on the back of her neck. A hand clamped down brutally onto her shoulder from behind, shattering the silence. She gasped, spinning around in absolute terror, only to find her mother, Maria, staring at her with wide, horrified eyes and a face as pale as death itself. Maria aggressively pulled Elena back down into the darkness of the basement, her grip painfully tight. "Are you trying to get us killed?" Maria fiercely whispered, her voice shaking violently as tears welled in her eyes. "You think you are uncovering a game, Elena, but you don't know what they did. You don't know what they are capable of. If they find out you are watching them, we won't just lose our jobs. We will disappear, just like the others." The revelation sent a chilling shiver straight down Elena's spine. Her mother didn't just know about the danger, she had been actively hiding the truth to protect them for 17 long years, confirming that the horror inside Blackwood Manor was far grander, and far more lethal, than Elena had ever dared to imagine. The basement air felt colder than usual as Elena stared at her mother, the realization crashing down on her like a physical weight. Her mother wasn't just a passive bystander, she was a keeper of the secret, an unwilling accomplice bound by terror. Maria's hands continued to shake as she sat on the edge of her small cot, her voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. 17 years ago, before you were born, there was another girl who lived in this house, Maria revealed, staring blankly at the concrete floor. Her name was Clara. She was the governess for the Winters extended family. She found out that Arthur Winters was embezzling millions from a charity fund meant for the city's poorest neighborhoods. She threatened to go to the authorities. Elena leaned in, her heart pounding. "What did they do to her, mother?" Maria looked up, tears finally spilling over her worn cheeks. "She vanished. The family told the public she had suddenly resigned and moved across the country. But that night, I saw Arthur and his security detail carrying a heavy, wrapped carpet out to the woods behind the estate. The next day, the charity funds were gone, the records were altered, and Clara was never heard from again. They paid off the local police precinct to ensure no investigation ever launched. They gave me this basement apartment and a lifetime of employment to keep my mouth shut. My silence was the price of your life, Elena." The weight of the revelation left Elena breathless. The pristine, charitable public image of the Winters family was entirely built on the literal and metaphorical grave of an innocent woman. But the horror of the past quickly collided with the danger of the present. The very next afternoon, Mr. Winters called an emergency meeting in the main drawing room, summoning every member of the household staff, including Elena and her mother. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Standing beside his father was Julian, his eyes scanning the lineup of servants with cold, calculating scrutiny. Arthur Winters stepped forward, holding a high-end security printout. "It has come to my attention that someone has been accessing the master suite during off hours," he announced, his voice booming with authority. "Furthermore, our digital network logs show an unauthorized attempt to look into historical financial records from the estate's IP address. We know there is a mole in this house. We know someone is looking where they don't belong." Elena kept her gaze firmly fixed on the floor, but she could feel Julian's eyes burning into the side of her face. He walked slowly down the line of staff, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood. He stopped directly in front of Elena, leaning down slightly so only she could hear him. "The problem with shadows, Elena," he whispered, "is that they change when the light shifts. And right now, the light is shining directly on you." The psychological warfare escalated into an active trap just 48 hours later. While her mother was busy managing a massive catering delivery at the front gates, Elena received a typed note slipped under her basement door. It read, "If you want the final proof to destroy the Winters family, come to the old greenhouse at the edge of the woods at midnight. Bring the leather ledger from the master suite. Elena knew it was highly likely a trap. But the opportunity to finally secure the evidence needed to avenge Clara and free her mother from a lifetime of fear was too powerful to ignore. She waited until the clock struck midnight, slipping the hidden leather ledger into her coat pocket before sneaking out through the servant's side exit. The night was pitch black, the wind howling violently through the ancient oak trees as she navigated the overgrown pathway toward the dilapidated glass greenhouse. She stepped inside the skeletal structure, the glass panes rattling in the wind. The air inside smelled of damp earth and rotting vegetation. "Hello," she called out softly, her voice trembling. "I have the ledger." "Who are you?" From the darkness behind a row of dead ferns, a figure stepped forward into the pale moonlight filtering through the cracked ceiling. It wasn't a rogue security guard or a blackmailed police officer. It was Julian Winters. He held a small, silver revolver in his right hand, a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his face. "I knew it was you," Julian said, his tone dripping with arrogance as he raised the weapon. "You really thought you were clever, didn't you? The maid's quiet little daughter, playing detective. You thought you could unseat my family. My father thinks you're just a nuisance, but I know you're a threat that needs to be permanently eliminated, just like Clara was." Elena backed away slowly, her heel catching on a stray brick. But before Julian could take another step forward, the heavy wooden doors of the greenhouse burst open. Mr. Arthur Winters stormed into the structure, flanked by two burly, dark-suited security guards. "Julian, lower the weapon." Arthur roared, his face flushed with panic. Julian didn't lower the gun. "Father, she has the ledger. She knows everything. We have to get rid of her now, before she goes to the feds." Arthur stepped between Julian and Elena, his breathing heavy as he looked at the maid's daughter. But his next words delivered the ultimate, devastating mid-story twist that completely shattered Elena's understanding of her entire existence. "You can't shoot her, Julian," Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with a strange, agonizing emotion. "You can't touch a single hair on her head. Because Elena isn't just the maid's daughter. She is your biological sister. She is my daughter, and the rightful heir to half of this estate." The words hung in the damp, freezing air of the greenhouse like a sudden, paralyzing frost. The wind outside seemed to die down instantly, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Elena stood frozen, her mind violently rejecting the information her ears had just processed. His daughter. Julian's sister. The very blood she thought was entirely separate from the rot of Blackwood Manor was, in reality, the exact same blood running through her own veins. Julian's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The smug, triumphant sneer vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror and disgust. His hand, previously steady as he held the silver revolver, began to shake violently. What did you just say?" Julian stammered, his voice dropping to a panicked, childlike pitch. "Father, that's impossible. She's a servant. She's the maid's child. You're lying to protect her." "I am not lying, Julian," Arthur Winters shouted, looking older and more broken than Elena had ever seen him. He slowly turned his head to look at Elena, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of shame, regret, and a strange, desperate pleading. 17 years ago, before Clara disappeared, your mother Maria and we had an affair. When Maria became pregnant with you, Elena, I realized the immense scandal could destroy my marriage, my social standing, and the merger that built this empire. I couldn't let anyone know. But I couldn't let you starve, either. Arthur took a tentative step toward Elena, his hands held out in a gesture of peace, but Elena instinctively took a sharp step back, her back pressing against the cold, dirty glass of the greenhouse wall. I made a deal with Maria, Arthur continued, his voice cracking. I promised her absolute security. I promised that you would grow up safe, housed, and educated within these walls, provided she never revealed the truth of your parentage to anyone, especially not to you. Your mother sacrificed her own pride, her own freedom, to live as a servant in this house just so she could keep you close, and so I could quietly fund your life from the shadows. The trust fund meant for the Winters heir. It was legally restructured years ago. It splits down the middle, Elena. The moment you turn 18, half of everything we own, the manor, the investments, the family trust, automatically transfers to you. It is written into the irrevocably sealed family charter. The revelation was a devastating physical blow to Julian. His entire identity, his arrogance, and his sense of absolute superiority were built on the premise that he was the sole prince of the Winters dynasty. To find out that the quiet, invisible maid's daughter he had spent his life looking down upon was actually his equal, and possessed a legal claim to half of his kingdom, shattered his mind. No. Julian whispered, his eyes widening with a maniacal, dangerous light. No, I won't let this happen. I am the sole heir. You built this empire for me, father. I won't let some bastard child of a servant take away what is mine. With a sudden, frantic yell, Julian re-aimed the revolver, pointing it directly at Elena's chest. Julian, stop. Arthur screamed, lunging forward to grab his son's arm. But before Arthur could reach him, the heavy wooden doors of the greenhouse flew open once more. Its tiny red light casting a crimson glow over the faces of the broken Winters dynasty. Julian's hand slowly began to lower, the heavy silver revolver slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the cold, damp earth. The terrifying prince of Blackwood Manor looked suddenly small, stripped of his unearned armor, realizing that his life of unchallenged cruelty had reached its absolute end. Arthur Winters slumped against a rusted iron support beam, his head in his hands, completely defeated not by an external enemy, but by the weight of his own decades-old sins. Elena looked at her mother, seeing her clearly for the first time in her life. The quiet, submissive woman who had spent 17 years scrubbing floors and bowing her head to monsters had done it all as a shield. Every humiliating word Maria had endured, every long hour she had worked until her hands bled, had been a calculated sacrifice to keep her daughter safe and close. Elena, Arthur said, his voice a pathetic, gravelly whisper as he looked up. I did it for you. I kept you here so you would have a future. You have the Winters blood. You can have the life you always deserved. We can announce it to the world. You can have the wealth, the status, the manor. Elena looked around the grand estate that had loomed over her childhood like a gilded prison. She looked at the towering iron gates in the distance, at the marble walls that had hidden the screams of Clara, and at the man who claimed to be her father but had only ever treated her as a shameful secret to be managed. I don't want your name, Mr. Winters, Elena said, her voice remarkably calm, steady, and filled with an unbreakable strength. And I don't want your blood money. There is nothing in this house but rot and ghosts. Elena walked over to her mother, gently taking Maria's trembling hand in her own. The warmth of her mother's grip was worth more than all the gold hidden in the vaults of Blackwood Manor. We are leaving, Elena announced, looking directly into Arthur's hollow eyes. The trust fund you set up will be liquidated, and every single cent of it will be donated anonymously to the charity Clara tried to protect all those years ago. Her name will be cleared, and your crimes will be laid bare. You will keep your freedom only as long as you stay away from us, and as long as you cooperate with the authorities to finally bring Clara home. Arthur could only nod, a broken man signing away his empire to save himself from a prison cell. Julian stood frozen, staring at the floor, completely hollowed out by the sudden loss of his future. Together, mother and daughter turned their backs on the greenhouse and walked out into the cool night air. As they crossed the manicured lawns of the estate, Elena felt the suffocating weight of Blackwood Manor finally lifting from her shoulders. The towering iron gates, which had once felt like the boundaries of a cage, now stood wide open. They walked down the long, winding driveway, leaving the glittering lights of the grand house behind them. For the first time in her life, Elena didn't walk with her eyes cast down to the ground. She walked with her chin held high, looking toward the horizon where the first faint, golden embers of dawn were beginning to break through the dark night sky. They had no grand inheritance, no prestigious family name, and no sprawling estate to call their own. But as they stepped past the boundary of the property and onto the open road, they had something far more valuable. They had the truth, they had their dignity, and most importantly, they had each other. The maid's daughter didn't just know the secret, she had used it to break the chains of the past, stepping out of the shadows and into a brand new, beautifully bright future of her own making.